All right. Good morning. The committee will come to order. I am pleased to be chairing this hearing today to discuss entrepreneurship training opportunities for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. Our committee has a long-standing tradition of working in a bipartisan manner on behalf of America's 30 million small businesses. It is through this work that we strive to ensure programs at SBA are effective and seek ways to encourage entrepreneurship. Today, we have the opportunity to delve into an issue that has the potential to help people who have been traditionally locked out of the labor market. Let me begin by talking about our criminal justice system. The United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. Despite having only 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. People are locked up in nearly 7,000 facilities across the country, 109 federal prisons, 1,719 state prisons, 1,772 juvenile correctional facilities, and 3,163 local jails. I ran out of air by reading all those numbers. Sadly, there are more jails than colleges and universities in the United States. That alone is telling. In our federal prison facilities today, nearly half of those in prison are serving time for nonviolent drug offenses, and it is expensive to put people behind bars. In fiscal year 2017, the average cost to incarcerate a federal inmate was $36,299 a year, or $99.45 a day, $9,900 with 45 cents a day. Congress took steps last year to enact legislation to reform our criminal justice system, and I'm proud supporter of the First Step Act, which gives nonviolence offenders a chance to re-enter society. While this legislation is a step in the right direction, the problem is overwhelming, and solutions must come from multiple sources. And that is why I'm holding this hearing today, so we can explore innovative ways to give returning citizens the support they need to rebuild their lives after their release from prison, and to work to break the destructive cycle of recidivism, which are tragically too high and are tearing apart too many communities across the country. After paying their debt to society, former inmates return to their communities with hopes and goals of starting fresh. In 2018, more than 37,000 incarcerated individuals were released from federal prisons, and more than 97% of the nation's 180,000 federal inmates will eventually be released. The recidivism statistics are sobering, showing that if we don't take steps now, nearly half of those released will be rearrested within 8 years. This is because returning citizens face steep challenges when faced with the often daunting task of reintegrating into society. Many lack education and skills needed to engage in a 21st century economy. Many struggle to find stable and affordable housing. And put simply, many employers do not want to hire them because of the stigma associated with serving time in prison. At the end, this serves no one. In fact, it leads to dim employment prospects, reduced earning potentials, and yes, it increases the rate of recidivism. So what can we here on this committee do to be a part of the solution to this crisis? We can start by looking at the role that entrepreneurship can play in helping formerly incarcerated individuals get back on track to pursue meaningful and healthy lives. Supporting these individuals also offers the potential to build wealth and create greater economic mobility. In the coming weeks, the committee plans to introduce several bills which will require SBA resource partners to provide counseling and training to individuals in prison and post-release. The in-prison services will be carried out by women's business centers and small business development centers. Federal prisoners will be eligible for intensive, in-depth classroom instruction combined with one-on-one mentoring. SCORE will be required to provide formerly incarcerated individuals with regular one-on-one mentoring, workshops, and online instruction specifically tailored to their unique needs. SBA resource partners with more than 1,000 centers located across the country are perfectly suited and very well positioned to carry out these services in federal prisons. Entrepreneurship is the stepping stone to new opportunity for individuals who are locked out of the labor market. Unlocking opportunities for the formerly incarcerated will empower and enable them to rebuild their lives, build wealth, and promote lasting economic growth. With that, I thank each of the witnesses for joining us today, and I look forward to your testimony. I now like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Chabot, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The search for meaningful work upon release from prison can be a long and difficult journey, particularly for those who have been removed from society for an extended period of time. To overcome those challenges, many inmates acquire valuable skills and work experience through programs like Federal Prison Industries. I've worked with Federal Prison Industries for many, many years here, from vocational training opportunities and other educational courses. Today, we will be hearing from witnesses representing organizations that help individuals reenter society by developing their entrepreneurial spirit. Successful reentry programs utilize various strategies for preparing individuals to reenter society as productive citizens. I, like many of my colleagues here today on both sides of the aisle, believe strongly that these programs are not only beneficial to those individuals who will be reentering, but also to our society overall. We owe it to these returning individuals and to all of our fellow citizens to make sure that we are good stewards in this rehabilitation. As former President Bush noted in his 2004 State of the Union address, quote, "America is the land of second chances, and when the gates of prison open, the path ahead should lead to a better life," unquote. I think many of us look forward to the testimony of our panel today and learning more about their recommendations for alleviating barriers to entrepreneurship when they reenter society. I would note that I do have a school group that I have to take care of for a short period of time, so I'll be leaving, but then coming back and will be ably filled in by one of my colleagues. I believe Mr. Hearn will be filling in for me. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. The gentleman yields back. And if committee members have an opening statement prepared, we would ask that they be submitted for the record. I would like to just take a minute to explain the timing rules. Each witness gets 5 minutes to testify, and the members get 5 minutes for questioning. There is a lighting system to assist you. The green light will be on when you begin, and the yellow light comes on when you have 1 minute remaining. The red light comes on when you are out of time, and we ask that you please stay within that time frame to the best of your ability. I will now like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Sean Hopwood. Mr. Hopwood is a distinguished lawyer and professor of law at Georgetown University. His research and teaching interests include criminal law and procedure, civil rights, and the constitutional rights of prisoners. He received a JD as a Gates Public Service Law Scholar from the University of Washington School of Law. Mr. Hopwood's legal journey began in federal prison, where he learned to write briefs for prisoners while serving a 12-year sentence for bank robberies. 2 petitions were later granted review by the United States Supreme Court, and he won a number of other cases in federal courts throughout the country. Welcome, Mr. Hopwood, and I am pleased to have someone with your expertise on the panel. Our second witness is Mr. Gary Wozniak. Mr. Wozniak is the founder and CEO of Recovery Park in Detroit, Michigan. In his current role, Mr. Wozniak leads the overall vision and framework for the nonprofit, which exists to create jobs for people with barriers to employment. Mr. Wozniak has first-hand knowledge of what it's like to start anew after serving time in prison. Prior to launching Recovery Park, he was a successful stockbroker who became addicted to drugs. He served 4 years in federal prison for using his clients' money to fuel his addiction. Mr. Wozniak turned to entrepreneurship and opened up several pizza franchises. Welcome, Mr. Wozniak. I look forward to hearing your story. Our third witness is Ms. Corinne Hodges, the CEO of the Association of Women's Business Centers, where she is working tirelessly to secure economic and entrepreneurial opportunities for women. Prior to joining the association in January 2019, Ms. Hodges led the public relations team for Kia Motors Manufacturing in Georgia. She also has experience as a small business owner. Ms. Hodges helped at her mother's woman-owned trucking company in Michigan and also ran her own advertising and public relations agency. Thank you for being here. And now I would like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Chabot, to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jerry Blassingame is the founder and CEO of Soteria Community Development Corporation and senior pastor of Soteria Christian Fellowship. He attended Columbia International University and studied architectural engineering at Greenville Technical College. In 1995, he received a 20-year prison sentence, but served 3.5 years after being paroled in 1999. In 2018, he published a book, Reclaimed, a memoir of his journey. He's passionate about helping those who have been incarcerated through reentry and helping them to become productive citizens. He has continued to fight for change in legislation since he was granted that pardon, and we thank him for being here today, and yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chabot. Mr. Hopwood, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez, and all members of the committee for the opportunity to testify in enthusiastic support for the Prison to Proprietorship Act. I'll give you my introduction that I give, whether it's to the President of the United States, to members of Congress, to churches, to chambers of commerce. And that is, my name is Sean Hopwood. I'm an associate professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, and I committed a violent crime, but I am not a violent criminal. And I give that introduction just as a reminder that, character is not static, people change, and the law should recognize this, and we should be in the business of giving second chances to people coming out of prison. It's good for society, it changes lives, it strengthens families, and it helps make our communities safer. I served nearly 11 years in federal prison. I learned the law while I was there. I now litigate cases in federal courts on criminal law and civil rights issues, including prisoner rights issues. And I study the federal criminal justice system as a legal academic at Georgetown. And I was also very fortunate to work and advise members of Congress and the President on the First Step Act, which I want to congratulate all of you for helping to pass, because it has, why I say it's two things at once. On the one hand, it's still quite modest reform, but on the other hand, I think it's the best criminal justice reform bill to come out of Congress in my lifetime. And I do want to thank you for that. But as it's called, it's the First Step Act, and we need so much more if we ever expect to reduce the number of people in our federal prisons, and more importantly, for this committee, reduce the recidivism rate of people coming out of prison. And everyone should be interested in that. We have 600,000 people that leave American prisons every year. We have around 30 to 40,000 people that leave federal prison every year. We know that around 95% of people sentenced to federal prison will one day return to the community. And we also know that the criminal justice system has now impacted so many more Americans. We have 113 million Americans who have someone in their close to immediate family who has been to jail or prison within their lifetime. And so this is often what I refer to mass incarceration as the civil rights issue of our day. So why prison entrepreneurship programs? Well, a couple things. We know that the biggest factor in reducing the recidivism rate of people coming out of federal prison are a few things. One, employment, and two, stable housing. And this bill addresses the employment issue. People coming out of prison have an unemployment rate that's 5 times higher than the average American and even higher than people had at the Great Depression. And people coming out of prison have a great deal of difficulty finding employment, both because of the stigma of having the federal conviction, but also because there are 300,000 collateral consequences of a felony conviction. I thought that when I got out of prison, I had served my time and that I would get to move on and get a second chance in life until I realized that as someone with a felony conviction, you can be legally discriminated against in housing, employment, public benefits, voting rights, and just the little things like when parents of the children that my kids go to school with come and say, hey, can we send our kids over to your house? I get really nervous because I worry if they find out about my background, how that will impact whether or not they want to send their kids over to my house. And so very few people get a true second chance. It's one of the reasons why I'm not a great fan of the word returning citizen, because returning second-class citizen would be a more appropriate moniker for people coming out of prison. Given that we know that employment really reduces the recidivism rate, this bill really does that. It will help people. We have had very much success in Texas and other prison systems with prison entrepreneurship programs. In my written testimony, I talk about the story of Marcus Bullock, who served 8 years in Virginia prison and came out and started Flick Shop. He recently did a TEDx talk, and he is a good example of what can happen when people get entrepreneurship training in prison. For many people that come out, particularly those that have committed violent offenses and sex offenses, entrepreneurship is the only way for them to get gainful employment. And so because this bill will get at that particular problem, I encourage you to pass this into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogwood. Mr. Wasner, you're next. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez, and to the entire committee for having me here today. I came to testify because I'm in full support as well of the legislation that you intend to pass. I started an enterprise called Recovery Park, and we're a social enterprise in the city of Detroit. And our mission is to create jobs for people with barriers to employment. So people coming out of prison, people coming out of drug treatment programs. Obviously, from the introduction that I got, it's a process that's near and dear to my heart because I did serve 3.5 years in federal prison from 1988 to 1991. And when I got out of prison, I spent 3 months actively looking for a job, and my last job interview was with Enterprise Car Rental, and they turned me down for a desk clerk job. I went home that night and I looked in the mirror and I said, I'm tired of people telling me no, and I had to do something different. And so I took my business skills that I developed as a stockbroker and I started looking at business opportunities. The easiest way for me to get into business from a capital standpoint was to go into a franchise operation, and so I opened up a Jets Pizza franchise. I don't think they're here in D.C., but I ended up owning 4 Jets Pizza stores, and that was really the launch of an entrepreneurial career for me. So since the 4 Jets Pizza stores, I've owned 7 total businesses. And when the meltdown happened in 2008, I closed my businesses down because several of them were financial institutions that were lending money to people that wanted to start businesses, and I couldn't borrow money cheap enough and get it out effectively in the marketplace. It was at that point that I went back to my roots of drug addiction to the treatment center that I went to in 1987, Share House, because they were struggling because of the meltdown, and I helped them reorganize financially. And that was where Recovery Park was born. So it was a way to create a social enterprise that could create jobs for the people that are coming out of the prison system in the state of Michigan and give them a leg up with a permanent job and benefits and wraparound services around housing and transportation so that they really had an opportunity to become successful citizens. The last 30 years owning these businesses has been a real eye-opening experience for me. because when I launched the businesses, I did not have access to training, and I did not have access to capital. I went to the people that were closest to me, my friends and family, to get access to capital. But even then, I couldn't get traditional lending. I couldn't get SBA support. I couldn't get any of the traditional lines that an entrepreneur or a business startup would go after. So the opportunities that you're talking about today, had I had an opportunity while I was in federal prison in Duluth, Minnesota, to become educated around how to run a business, how to start a business, how to access capital, and then when I got out of prison, actually had micro lending to come from the SBA or an SBA-supported institution, I think would have given me a real leg up. As Mr. Hopwood talked about, so he talked about the necessity of jobs when people come out of prison. It's a little anecdotal, but my work over the last 30 years with returning citizens, basically if somebody gets a job within their first 3 months of coming out of an institution, they are probably not going to go back and reoffend. If they can't find work within their first 6 months, there's a 30% chance that that person's going to reoffend. If they can't find work in 9 months, there's a 70% chance that that person's going to reoffend. And if they can't find gainful employment and housing within a year, they're definitely going back to prison. Those are unconscionable statistics, okay? And we have an opportunity here today to change that. The First Offender Act was a great first step. This is a great second step to start getting rid of some of those barriers. Today, I sit on 5 nonprofit boards. I've owned 7 businesses. I've got a social enterprise. I'm the treasurer of 2 of the boards that I sit on. I'm on a financial committee. I still can't go mop floors in a nursing home by law because they're afraid I'm going to steal money from the elderly clients that are in there. That's unconscionable. Okay, and there's no way to get around that with the rules the way they're set up. So this is an opportunity for us today to actually do something positive, to give people the educational opportunities, to train them with the skill sets that they have. And I'm telling you that educationally, a lot of people in prison might not have the traditional learning, but I guarantee you there's a lot of people in prison that understand customer service, that understand cash flow management, that understand, supply and demand, that understand, the food chain of how a product gets into the marketplace. And if those skill sets can be channeled in a positive way and money applied to it, I think the world's their oyster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wozniak. Ms. Hodges. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Shabbat, and distinguished members of the committee, good morning and thank you for convening today's hearing. My name is Corinne Hodges. I serve as the CEO of the Association of Women's Business Centers. Our organization supports the national network of women's business centers, providing programming and advocacy to improve services to women entrepreneurs. So I'm honored to be here today. The Women's Business Center program is a public-private partnership with over 30 years of success in providing training, counseling, mentoring, and access to capital to women entrepreneurs across the country. What began as 4 demonstration sites in 1988 is now a network of 114 centers with more than 150 locations nationwide, in no small part thanks to this committee's support. In that time, women business centers have served more than 2 million women entrepreneurs, leading to the creation and expansion of tens of thousands of new businesses and jobs. The Women's Business Center program continues to fulfill its congressional mandate of ensuring that women's entrepreneurial drive is fueled by adequate resources to keep the small business engine of the economy thriving. It is the only program statutorily dedicated to serving economically and socially disadvantaged women. All of our centers live up to this mandate, but a number of our centers take that mandate even further by bringing their services into the state and federal prison systems, both to men and women, and equip them with the training and knowledge needed to start their own business upon release from custody. Many more of our centers also offer specific training and resources to the formerly incarcerated who seek out business training after their release. The Missouri Women's Business Center Aspire Mo class provides an illuminating example of what can be accomplished when undertaking entrepreneurship training in prisons. Aspire Mo was launched in collaboration with the Missouri Department of Corrections Reentry Unit. It is a 20-week entrepreneurship course for felony offenders in the Women's Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center, a state-run facility. The course focuses on all aspects of entrepreneurial training, such as financial literacy, use of credit cards and banking basics, formulating a business concept, and pitch development. They have also established systems with several of their bank partners to provide microloans that are not based on credit score or felony records. In addition, they utilize Kiva, a nonprofit that connects entrepreneurs to 0% interest loans and other crowdfunding platforms. The Women's Business Center at SNAP, located in Spokane, Washington, teaches financial literacy classes in both the county jail and the local state prison. In their experience with this population, they found a lack of credit history or poor credit as primary barriers to access to capital. In addition to business training, they encourage participants to visit microlenders for access to capital. They also teach clients about financial scams and predators in order to position them for success as entrepreneurs, avoiding disastrous credit terms and costly investments. There are additional examples of prison entrepreneurship training programs offered by women's business centers from California to Tennessee in the written testimony I've submitted for the record. Many women's business centers offer services specifically for the formerly incarcerated. The Women's Business Center of Northern Ohio, which operates locations in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, recently participated in Reentry Week along with a number of community partners. They offered a full-day small business workshop for formerly incarcerated individuals looking to start their own business. The workshop included strategic business planning, marketing strategy and development, financial literacy, and legal steps for starting a new business. The Wisconsin Women's Business Initiative Corporation, WIBIC, partners with community organizations who serve returning citizens and lend to individuals with criminal records. Current WIBIC client and former inmate Ed Hennings served 20 years in prison and is now the owner of 3 businesses. He first sought the assistance of WIBIC by taking all of the business education courses they offered. He eventually received a small loan through WIBIC. He now runs a successful barber shop and salon in Milwaukee, and he was recently approved for a $65,000 loan for his trucking business. His story, among many others, is a testament to the success that the formerly incarcerated can achieve with proper business training, counseling, and access to capital. Clearly, entrepreneurship has the power to create pathways to success while reducing recidivism. We need legislation that amplifies the work that several of our women's business centers are already doing for the current and formerly incarcerated, and which allows us to build off that knowledge, expertise, and passion to take these services nationwide. We are confident that women's business centers and the Association of Women's Business Centers can be competent partners in that endeavor to help Americans returning home from incarceration overcome barriers to employment by utilizing their talent, skills, and ideas to start businesses that allow them to provide for themselves and their families.
Thank you, Ms. Hodges. Mr. Blossingame, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman and ranking members. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here today to share my story. When I think about my story and people wonder, how can a college-educated person go to prison? My story doesn't start when we go into prison. It starts as a 5-year-old kid witnessing his mother getting murdered. And a lot of times we don't talk about the trauma that a lot of us who've been incarcerated face. While I was in prison, one of the things that really helped me was faith and knowing that people who cared about me came into prison. The faith community was there for me when no one else was there, and it got me to understand that when I got out, I needed to change my life. I ended up serving only 3.5 years of a 20-year prison sentence, and every day for 3.5 years, I wrote down the plan for what I'm doing now. And that's one thing I look for when I bring men into my program. I look for guys who have a short-term and long-term goals. I look for guys who've been journaling, and I look for guys when they get ready to get out, they're ready to get into the community. So one of the things that helped us, in 1999, when I was released, there was nothing, no services that was helping people to start business, especially with criminal backgrounds. So a young black man in the South trying to start businesses. So here I am with a nonprofit. I was released on March of 1999. And in April of 1999, we started a nonprofit, had a charter. And the faith community rallied around me, pulled money together to help me to get this nonprofit off the ground. One of the things we did first was we went to one of the local nonprofits to partner with us. They gave us a house. They gave us a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. We put 4 guys in it. And then we got another house. Now we had 8 guys in our transitional housing program. No one would hire any of our guys, so we started a landscape business. and we started cutting grass in the community, and the guys were making money. A local couple in our church donated 9 dilapidated housing in a drug-infested neighborhood, and we got a $100,000 grant from the Department of Commerce through the South Carolina Association of Community Development Corporations. So we were able to take unlikely bedfellows and use resources that were not allowed for reentry. So we became a community development corporation. And I soon found out that community development corporations help low to moderate income people gain wealth and have access to capital. So I'm one of those, I can take something a little and make a lot out of it. And so we took that $100,000 grant and we leveraged it to $700,000 to build 6 3-bedroom, 2-bath, low-income rentals for men once they graduated our program, because no one would rent the guys housing once they graduated a 1-year program. So we found out that it was more than just housing and jobs. It was family reintegration. And so I also want to let you all know who are here that we just can't look at starting businesses. We have to look at trauma. We have to look at financial literacy, family reintegration. The whole community has to come together. And also, I believe every agency in Washington has to work together. One of the things that I realized, too, is that the agencies don't work together. And so if all the agencies could work together, it would be great, because we're also got home funds from HUD, which was an unlikely bedfellow, to give money to a reentry organization. So these are just some of the things that we've done over the last few years. 5 years ago, we started a deconstruction business where we tear down old houses in our city, which this lumber was going into the landfill to be thrown away. Our guys started taking the lumber, and we make reclaimed wood furniture from the lumber. So we trained the guys who were getting out of prison in our wood shop. And so now we have a business that sells reclaimed wood furniture. So we're reclaiming wood and we're reclaiming lives. The wood that would have been thrown away, the men who are getting out of prison are taking that wood and making beautiful artwork. And so I just want to be here to let you guys know that there are a lot of Jerry Blasingames out there who don't have an opportunity. And if the faith community had not stepped up to the plate 20 years ago, I would not be here today. And so I am thrilled to know that you all are thinking about doing something to help those of us who have criminal backgrounds, and especially those who don't get education. And my last thing I want to say is that when I got out, I went back to school to finish my degree in architecture, and I could not get a Pell Grant because of a drug conviction. And so all of these agencies has to work together to make sure that we get the proper resources that we need to be productive citizens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And let me take this opportunity to thank all of you, and congratulations for being here, for having the opportunity to build to make contributions to our community, and for being here and sharing your story so that we could look at this committee and look at ways where we can provide the tools to help many more, given the fact that so many thousands of people are coming out and they are unprepared. They deal with the stigma. So how can we empower these individuals to empower themselves and their families? So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And I would like to ask my first question to Ms. Hodges. You spoke about the fact that some of the women's development centers, and we have approximately how many around the country?
150 locations.
And how many of those are already providing services and literacy and all the training that is needed to help these individuals?
That's a tough question to answer, Ms. Chairwoman, because first of all 150 locations obviously provide training and counseling. And so if a returned citizen enters into a women's business center, of course they're offered services. In terms of services inside the federal facilities, I don't know exactly the number. We're receiving anecdotes and reports from centers all across the country, but I don't have specific data to know specifically which ones do and which ones don't, which ones did this year and did last year.
So many, based on the research and the data that we have, many incarcerated individuals lack basic literacy skills. So it will be important for participants in federal entrepreneurship training program to have a strong foundation in financial literacy. Based on the legislation that we are discussing today, do you feel that the elements are in the bill that will help address some of those issues?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, we feel that the bill is adequate and addresses through the comprehensive and intensive training, the access to capital, the financial literacy, the business plan development and pitching, all of the elements that have been incorporated successfully with results throughout the women's business centers. We also believe that the legislation that's been discussed is adequate in terms of the resources that it brings to the table, because without those resources, those women's business centers could not provide these services without sacrificing services to their existing clients. And I would also be remiss if I didn't thank this committee for their support in passing H.R. 4405, the Women's Business Center Improvement Act of 2019, which increases the authorization level for women's business centers. And also would have to highlight the efforts of Senator Cardin on this issue with his bill, the New START Act of 2019, which AWBC endorsed.
Thank you. Mr. Hopwood and Mr. Wozniak, we have heard how veterans hire veterans because they understand the challenges, but also the training and expertise other veterans have upon returning home. Do the formerly incarcerated who launch their own businesses tend to hire other former inmates? Do you have any data or experience in that respect?
So, good question. We hire almost exclusively people coming out of prison. In our 3.5-year project to date, we've hired 20 people. We track all of them. 19 of them are still employed. None have reoffended. None have gone back, violated probation or parole. We continue to provide support services to make sure that they're stable in the workforce throughout the first 3 years, because we feel 3 years is a good indicator. The $13 million greenhouse we're getting ready to build will employ another 30 people, and the majority of them will be coming out of the system as well.
Thank you. Mr. Hope, yes.
Chairwoman Velasquez, I don't have any data other than anecdotes, and when I see businesses run by people like Mr. Wozniak or other people that I know who are formerly incarcerated, they do tend to hire the formerly incarcerated. One of the people that works for my law firm, Joshua Boyer, is a person who I served time with in federal prison and then hired to work with me on litigation when he got out. Marcus Bullock, the example I gave before, the owner of Flick Shop, hires almost exclusively people who are coming out of prison. Mm-hmm. So most prison entrepreneurs hire people coming out of prison in part because they don't view them with the same stigma that your average American would.
And can you explain or discuss the fact as to the importance of providing entrepreneurship training in prison?
Yes, because there are several groups of people, particularly in the federal system, that are it's difficult for them to find employment. And the groups of people I'm thinking of are people that commit sex offenses, particularly possession of child pornography, which is a large segment of the federal prison population. Those people have a very difficult time finding employment. I also think prison entrepreneurship makes a whole lot of sense for the federal prison population, considering so many of them are in for drug offenses, as Mr. Wozniak was saying. A lot of the people who committed drug offenses kind of have that hustle and that inner drive that matches up well with entrepreneurship. And I've seen a number of former federal drug offenders get out and go into that sort of work.
Thank you. My time has expired, so now I recognize Mr. Hearn for ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax and Capital Access from Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much. It really is an honor to listen to you all. A lot of people would think that you want people to feel sorry for you, but that's not what it is at all. I mean, it's quite the opposite of that. They want you to be respected for serving your time and to get reacquainted with society for whatever those purposes might be. I will tell you, I've been a business owner for over 30 plus years, McDonald's restaurants, banking, all kinds of things. Probably one of the greatest things that's happened in recent years was banning the box on applications. I've spent a lot of time in this area. I'm probably guilty, like a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners out there, of saying you would be the employee of last choice. I think this stigma has been changing. I would like to applaud the previous Congress and President Trump for the First Step Act, but as you alluded to, it's really just the first step. I've spent a lot of time in our one-stop centers, our workforce centers, and had people tell me that 1 in 3 people that come in the door have a record. And while Ban the Box has been off of the applications for a few years now, still employers view that, and they always go Google people, and so you get sort of the stigma of Ban the Box because of Google. And so it's about training and educating and changing our workforce centers, and we're working with the state right now and the governor to actually put somebody in the one-stop centers to get people back to work, because we know that lowers the recidivism rates dramatically. And being from Oklahoma, where we have, if not close to the highest women incarcerated in the country, majority of that's for drugs. And whether it's the dad or the mom, has a tremendous impact on the families, the kids. We have a lot of businesses. We take our dog to Muddy Paws, which is a entrepreneur that's hiring women to get them acquainted back to the workforce, and the entire place are women who have come out of prison. And I think all of our hearts have changed dramatically, not to be sympathetic, to be more understanding. And as we go forward here, is we can do more and more. There's a tremendous amount of workforce. I'm not sure what we're going to do with the issues of the sexual predators. I don't see that being anyone softening on those issues. But the other issues, whether it be for robbery, as you did your time for, or whether it be for drugs, or whether it be for, both of you all for drugs, you did your time, and I applaud you all for going back and never giving up. We have to protect that opportunity. We have incarceration terms for the purpose of paying back your debt to society for what you did and breaking laws. But you shouldn't have it held over your head for the rest of your lives. Obviously, there are certain jobs that you probably will be a long time before people that have been incarcerated can take. But as we look forward, and what I'd like to do, I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee for capital access and growth, huge entrepreneur, thoughts on the ideas. We've talked about employment. I'd like just in the remaining time to go through, and I'd like to start with Mr. Blassingame and just kind of work to our left. And I'm going to jump over you for just a second. But what programs out there? I know the SBA is sort of softening up the opportunity to get loans, the micro loans for people that have been incarcerated, but what are some of the other areas that you've seen a real detriment in trying to get help to start businesses?
Well, every area. We've had to create our own, streams. One of the things that helped us back, a few years ago in 2008 and 9 when the feds had the IDA program, we used the IDA program, which was not even for people with criminal backgrounds. We used it to fuel our entrepreneurs in homeownership, so that people who are getting out of prison could gain access. And so it wasn't even for us, but as a community development practitioner, I brought those resources into our organization and gave them to the people who were previously incarcerated. So we created a lot of homeowners and business owners through that.
Okay. Mr. Wozniak?
So most of our funding has come from state resources through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and foundations. I've also brought whatever personal wealth I could bring into the equation. We just got approved for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for close to $7 million in funding. We are having a struggle with the SBA because of my felony background. Even though 30 years of being out of prison, they're having some issues with wanting to fund us. So, but that's where we're getting our money from.
Mr. Hopwood?
The problem starts oftentimes in prison. A lot of the men I served time with had never balanced a bank book, a checkbook, and so just the knowledge of how to run a business. In order to reduce recidivism, the process needs to start in prison, not just when they get out.
Madam Chairman, if I may, the Secretary DeVos went and recognized a prison in Oklahoma 2 months ago for a community college's involvement in doing the soft skills that, like you're talking about, and some won't be out for 2 or 3 years, but they had 40 or 50 folks showed up for that, so it was really great. Thank you so much for your time, and I yield back.
Time has expired, and now we recognize the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Contracting and Infrastructure, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say real quickly, Mr. Hopwood, when you were talking about the issues of stigma surrounding this and how it can really, all of you spoke about, I think, really eloquently about some of the issues and focused in on employment and housing. Just maybe 2 weeks ago, I was visiting a transitional housing facility for veterans. And, Mr. Hopwood, you talked about how people change. I was talking to an individual who got out of the military, was struggling with post-traumatic stress, got into a fight, and hurt some people. And look, I was in the Marines. I served. We were taught to accept responsibility for our actions and then move on and become better people for it. But, decades later, this guy still has this charge following him, and he can't get housing, right? And he's managed to stay out of prison for a long time, and is clearly working really hard to be successful, but this housing issue just he can't overcome it. So, I appreciate your sharing that, and I agree with you that we have to find some way to address this. I was curious, you didn't really talk much about how you got the educational opportunity when you were in prison, and Mr. Blasingame did mention that he had trouble with Pell Grant, so when he wanted to go and get his education. So I wanted to know what you did, because at the University of Maine in Augusta, there's a partnership with the Maine State Prison in the Maine Corrections Center, Women's Reentry Center, where they work with the Department of Education, what they call Second Chance Pell Initiative. So that people can get benefits or fund their education costs, so that they can get that education. You said it's important that we start in prison, so I was curious how you were able to do it.
Well, it was not due to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I can tell you that. There were very few educational or rehabilitation programs when I was in prison. I served in the military, in the U.S. Navy, and had a Montgomery GI Bill that I used to take college courses all across the country, and then when I got out, I pooled those courses together and finished a bachelor's degree, and was very fortunate after that to get into law school. But most people don't have that ability, and the veterans particularly really struggle with trauma. And many of them will tell you that the trauma of war is not that much different from the trauma of serving a long time in the federal prison system. And so, we really have to start, if we want to reduce recidivism, obviously we need resources for people when they get out of prison. But I say that recidivism reduction and rehabilitation starts the day someone enters the prison system. And all too often people waste years or decades just in prison, and we don't give them any programs, and then we kick them out with little to no job skills, and we expect a miracle to happen. And when it doesn't, we tend to say, oh, see, you were evil always to begin with, when really they just needed some chances.
Well, I do want to point out, it sounds as though your GI Bill stuck with you, despite the fact that you had committed a crime.
Yes.
So there's a policy difference right there between GI Bill and how we treat veterans who do find themselves in trouble with the law, and other people when it comes to other federal education programs. So it's just something for us to think about. But I wanted to ask any of you, if you wanted to talk about it, do you see any opportunity for any of the SBA entrepreneurial development programs like SBDCs or others to work within the prison system to build on educational opportunities like Second Chance, Pell? Would your programs be potentially more successful? Ms. Hodges, I'm kind of thinking of yours if it were tied in hand with educational opportunities.
I certainly think that's an interesting idea. The more partnerships that we forge throughout all of our services, whether it's in a facility or out, we know that makes the results and the outcomes more successful. So I would welcome the opportunity to really begin to research that more formally and to engage with the Office of Entrepreneurial Development on that topic. Certainly, there are already some examples of those partnerships in place, and I know with the Small Business Development Centers, and my partner over here, T. Rowe, his offices are already on campuses, and in some cases, our women's business centers are as well. And so forging those partnerships would be natural, it would be easy, but working more formally with the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, I think could really put some wind in our sails.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lady. It's Burchett, birch like the tree, and et like I just ate breakfast. So I just remind you of that. And I want to commend our Chair Lady. The first week we were here, I was reading, I saw on the internet where there was a jail in her district where they, unbelievably, it was cold up there. I live in Tennessee, and it gets down to 32 degrees and get a quarter inch of snow, and we close the schools. But it was really cold where she is, and there was a jail, and the power was off, and the people were, and I felt compelled to bring that to the committee's attention then, and I feel compelled now because I think it's, it's easy and it's cool to beat up on people that are in jail, but eventually, I believe 95% of them are going to get out, and we got to do something about it. And we need my background's technological and adult education, and we've got to do something. The trades are where it's at, it seems to me, and that's a perfect thing. And of course, I've skipped all over. I didn't read what my staff prepared for me. I don't know what I pay them for, Chair Lady. I don't ever follow what they got. Maybe that's where we need to start this deficit. No, I'm just kidding. Y'all don't get nervous. But anyway, I'll just go through my thing there, and I apologize. It's the Southern Baptist in me. I got to preaching. Just don't let us near your offering plate. That's all I got to say. But thank you all, Madam Chair, and again, I appreciate you for holding this important hearing, and thank you all for being here. It's an incredibly important issue, and I believe we need to work on it more. Just earlier this month, I wrote a letter in support of a prison workforce program in Claiborne County. It's a small area, rural folks, just hardworking country people. They're unbelievably cool people, and it works out to about 3% of the district I represent, but I try to spend as much time up there as I can. And ultimately, I want to make sure that individuals who are incarcerated, ready for a fresh start, they get a new beginning. They have all the opportunity to do so. And my question, Mr. Blassingame, I believe I said that right. If not, I apologize. You make a point in your testimony about government grants being hard to manage, and the people who need them never seem to receive them. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and how we can make sure this isn't the case anymore?
Sure. So there's a lot of reporting and a lot of staffing that's needed when it comes to government and managing government grants. A lot of small grassroots organizations do not have the capacity to manage. And then when the money comes down, we have to hire consultants to manage the grants for us, and the money that needs to go to programming goes to people, to pay them. So it's just a catch-22. So I would like to see more of us get training on the ground. I'm a self-taught person. I love to read, and so I taught myself to write grants. I've taught myself business, and so I'm an anomaly. I was one of those, but everybody's not a Jerry Blassingame. So I would love to see more people get training, even training while they are incarcerated, on how to manage grants and how to do business.
Yeah, a simple bookkeeping class might be in order. I've suggested that in the past, and it fell on deaf ears. Maybe something like that, some basic skills that you'll need to learn in the business community would be good, I would think.
Yes.
Mr. Wozniak, you mentioned coupling education opportunities with SCORE mentorship programs. Would specifically teaching individuals how to start a business work?
Did me. So I'm like Mr. Hopwood. We didn't have any opportunities for education when I was in federal prison. I could barely get newspapers in to read them to stay current. Had I had the opportunity to take Business 101 while I was in prison, how to read a balance sheet, how to do a P&L, how to do cash flow management, and then had access to funding, and then had access to mentoring through a SCORE system, I wouldn't have even bothered to look for a job. I would have had a business model already lined up and had some seed capital to get into it. So yes, it would make a very big difference.
All right. I just want to thank y'all for being here and have the courage to be here to talk about what's going on. Hopefully we can rewrite some of this in the future. And Chair Lady, again, I commend you on your noble stand. I know it maybe doesn't help you politically, but I think God likes it. He talks about the least amongst us, and
It's the right thing to
It's
do.
the right thing to do, Chair Lady.
The
Thank you so
gentleman
much.
yields back. Thank you. And now we recognize Ms. Chu from California, Chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And Mr. Hopwood, Mr. Wozniak, and Mr. Blassingame, your stories are so compelling. And Mr. Hopwood, I remember watching you on 60 Minutes telling your story, and it was just so incredibly important for people in America to understand what this process of rebuilding your lives is all about. And so let me ask you, Mr. Hopwood, my home state of California has taken several steps in recent years to extend higher education opportunities to incarcerated people. And the state now enrolls thousands of students in full credit degree building college courses in 34 of its 35 prisons. As you cite in your testimony, the RAND Corporation has found that correctional education programs are correlated with a 43% reduction in recidivism. So how do you think that public colleges and universities can promote employment and entrepreneur opportunities for incarcerated and returning citizens? How can they make a difference?
Well, so many of the best reentry stories I've seen involve community. And one of the communities that's very safe for people coming out of prison are colleges and universities, where people go and they feel like they are getting a fresh chance at life. And I think those programs have had success because people coming out of prison get the education they maybe never had and the chance that they maybe never had while in prison. Those programs you mentioned reduce recidivism, and what often you hear is, well, why would we give these free programs to people who broke the law? But that is so short-sighted when you think about spending a little bit of money on education in prison and entrepreneurship in prison saves a whole lot of money on the back end when that person does not commit a new offense, does not re-victimize someone, and we don't have to pay for the re-prosecution and reincarceration. So spending a little bit of money on the front end to make us safer and save a bunch of money on the back end, I call that good government. And we just have to quit being so short-sighted when it comes to trying to use rehabilitation programs. And between the First Step Act and some of the things that this Congress is doing now, I'm hopeful that people in federal prison today will have the opportunities that Mr. Wozniak and I did not have.
And then there's the release upon prison, from prison. What type of barriers do recently incarcerated people face as they leverage their training into full-time employment or entrepreneurship?
Well, somebody mentioned how difficult it is to get employment with the Google age. And yes, we have these policies that say ban the box, but people don't have to do deep background checks anymore. Even if the box is banned, someone does a Google search and finds out that someone has been convicted of a felony, it's really difficult to sway that person and convince that person to give them a second chance. And so we need more public-private partnerships. Just this last weekend, J.P. Morgan announced that it's going to start doing second chance hiring. Koch Industries has done that for several years, and I think it's going to require new laws from the Congress, but it's also going to require businesses to step up and say, we are going to affirmatively hire people coming out of prison knowing that they have felony convictions. And I think it's going to take us kind of pressing from all sides in order to get at this recidivism problem.
In fact, Mr. Wozniak, you experienced firsthand the barriers that formerly incarcerated people face who seek employment. You have a breadth of experience as a business owner running both traditional businesses and Recovery Park, where you offer employment. What would you tell business owners in breaking down the stigmas associated with hiring the formerly incarcerated? What would you tell them in terms of hiring those who are formerly incarcerated?
So we're working with a couple of manufacturing companies in Detroit right now because unemployment's so low, and I mean, people coming out of prison are a great resource. I tell them the successes that we're having in all the businesses that I've had, how stable the employees are, how they follow the rules, how they show up on time, how they want us to work the extra mile, how they do not exhibit any of the tendencies that probably took them to prison in the first place. I also talk about the opportunity to hire people and provide some support services to stabilize their workforce so that they're not hiring and firing and hiring and firing people, because it's expensive to do that. So if you hire somebody, my biggest success is a guy that went into prison at 14 years old. He came out 33 years later. In 2 years, he's on his way to a $60,000 welding job. He's getting married. He owns 2 cars. We've helped him clean up his credit. That's a success story. And that's what I tell people.
And have you been successful in persuading them?
Yes. I've got one company right now, a steel manufacturer, that wants us to come in and manage the returning workforce population.
Thank you. I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentle lady is back. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, Vice Chair of the committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, like others, want to congratulate you and your leadership for just giving the opportunity to have this platform discussion. So I thank you sincerely for your leadership. I want to deal with a question I think Mr. Hopwood was starting to touch on, but I don't think about what does it take. And the question I asked to members of the panel, other barriers do ex-offenders face when trying to start new businesses? You started down the line of saying a certain type of person. Can you kind of recall that conversation? Pick up on that. You were saying someone who's been involved with drugs who comes out of prison is better. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, from my experience, most of the people I served time with were there for drug offenses, and those people had hustled on the streets.
Right.
And so I have seen several of them get out and hustle on the streets, but in a different path.
Right.
And have been wildly successful starting businesses. They have the inner motivation. Some of them, are risk takers. And most of what they need is just educational opportunities in prison and some support when they get out. And if they had that support, you look at the prison entrepreneurship program in Texas. It's reduced recidivism there by 1/3. There's Defy Ventures. There's, in my home state of Nebraska, RISE, which goes in and trains people how to create a business plan and then helps them get small loans up to like $5,000 when they're released. I know one gentleman, took prison entrepreneurship program in prison, got out, got a small grant, and started a lawnmower service. He now, has 8 employees and 10 different riding lawnmowers and is wildly successful. And so particularly the federal prison system, which has fewer people in for violent offenses than the state systems, and a lot more people in there for drug offenses. In my experience, people who have committed drug offenses are ripe for doing doing entrepreneurship when they're out and have had success.
So in other words, I hear what you're saying. That's why I gave the chairwoman credit for these initiatives. We can do our part, but there's another part you're talking about. And I'm just trying to understand how to have that connection be made.
Well, I think part of it would, if I could wave a magic wand, would be not imposing such long sentences on people to begin with, which I think really hampers the rehabilitation effort. You take a 20-year-old and give them a 20-year mandatory minimum and tell them wake up every day and seize the day and improve yourself. Well, it's really hard for that person to do so. And the great irony of the American criminal justice system is the longer someone tends to spend in corrections, the least corrected they are. Not necessarily because, in part because of the prison system, but in part because your social skills deteriorate while in prison. And unless there are programs and educational opportunities and visitors coming in where you can kind of be tethered to the outside world, it's hard for people to take advantage of the programs that are in prison. And so I'd tell you, as a first step, reduce the prison sentences and put in more programs, and you would see a lot more people come out and have success.
Can I come down the line real quick?
So
Not to piggyback.
Thank you. In Michigan, we have innovation villages or vocational villages where people can actually go and they leave the prison for 9 hours a day, and they're in an actual work environment, and they're learning the skill sets that they need, and they're coupled with an employer. For the last 5 years, me and my team have been going into the prisons, and we've been actually teaching entrepreneurship classes in about 5 state prisons in the state of Michigan, and they're probably the most well-attended classes out of all the classes that they offer in the state. The people are like sponges. They want to learn, but they need the basic skill sets as well. So, like, how to put a business plan together, how to put the narrative together, how to put the financial spreadsheet together, and that needs to happen in prison. It needs to happen quickly because you need to capture people and keep them motivated to do good things when they get out.
I went to prison for selling drugs while I was in college, and so I had about 8 people in my community working for me. So when I got out, I took $100,000 and leveraged the $700,000 to build an affordable housing project. And so you are exactly right that those of us who have been in the drug dealing business, we have a business acumen. We just need to clean it up. And I also became a Christian while I was in prison, and so that helped me too. My faith has also been a great indicator, to help me to do the right thing. I love getting guys who have been in prison for dealing drugs and put them in our business. I have a guy right now who just got out from a federal prison, and he came right out, and he became part of my leadership team because of his leadership ability that he had while a gang member on the street.
Thank you. You're back, boss. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey.
Oh,
5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, and this is really great. I wish that more people could be able to just hear these stories because they really are wonderful and just talks about a situation that we really do need to figure out a way how to address head on because, like you say, most people, 95% of the prison population will be coming back into society, and so how they fit back into society, be able to earn a living, and some of those I think factors are very complicated too. Like how are you able to actually earn a good living to be able to pay car note, any sort of back child support that you may have. I mean, there are lots of different issues that go out there. It's not as easy as just being able to go and work at a minimum wage job at a fast food restaurant and think that that's going to supply like all of your needs to be able to function back into society. So I just want to thank all of you. Mr. Wozniak, one of the things that I missed in your testimony, and you may have talked about it, but I didn't catch it. When you started the pizza franchises, how did you get the capital or the money to start? Because I know most franchises cost at least what $10,000 to $20,000. A more well-known franchise could cost well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So I needed to raise a couple $100,000 to get into the franchise because I had a multi-store contract. I actually don't have a problem asking people for money because if I don't ask, they can't tell me no. And I went to some of the people that I actually stole money from to support my drug addiction. So some of my former clients and my relatives. And a number of them told me no, but some of them said yes. And they got paid back. So, that's how it started.
What sort of advice would you give to people that are coming out of prison, people that may be from more, what's the correct word, marginalized communities, for instance, that may not have access to those types of friends that you had, if they wanted to come out of prison and start their own business? Because, that's for, I talk to a lot of people that don't have, and people that live in my district that don't have a criminal background record, that would like capital to start up a business, would like to be able to have the relationships needed to go into a bank and get money and what have you, but they can't do it. And it's a huge source of frustration. And so I was just wondering what sort of advice would you have for people that are coming out that need access to this type of capital?
So my advice would be, if the access to capital that you need is too great, maybe you need to just downsize your initial business and figure out how to leverage the resources that you do have. All of my businesses have been in the city of Detroit. It's a really challenged city. A lot of the people that I deal with and a lot of the businesses that I've helped launch for other people have had the barriers that you're talking about. So undercapitalization, you just got to beat the bushes harder. You just got to look for programs that are available and figure out how to take 5,000 here and 6,000 there and 10,000 from somewhere else and piece it together and then leverage it like Mr. Blessingame did with his CDC.
Right, right, exactly.
And also, just don't give up. I mean, the biggest reason that most people fail at getting into business is they give up. They start listening to the noise around them. It's the 85% of the people that tell them, don't take the risks. You're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to make mistakes. Oh, you were a prisoner. Nobody's going to want you in your community. I don't listen to any of that noise. And any successful entrepreneur can't.
Mr. Hopwood, I think it was you, or it may have been Mr. Wozniak, that said something that was interesting about socialization. Because your socialization in prison is completely different than socialization on the outside. And I know a successful business owner in Dallas that told me that they had hired a lot of people that have been formerly incarcerated, and coming to work on time, honesty, those sorts of things really weren't a problem. But it really was the soft skills that was a huge issue, because you don't necessarily resolve problems in prison the same way that you would in the outside world. Do you just want to touch on that, and do you think that there are enough efforts in that area to help people? Do you think that that is the biggest problem, or?
I think that's one of the biggest. There aren't enough programs in the federal prison system. A hopeful first step will change that. But when you have conflict in the prison system, there's no de-escalation. And I often tell the story of my poor wife back here who we got married shortly after I got out, and I had been in prison for 11 years, and when we had arguments, I tended to revert back to who I was in prison, and that didn't make for a very good husband. And it doesn't make for, good coworkers when people get out. And so we do have to do a better job of helping people with social skills on the inside. And we've got to get more Americans to go in and teach classes in prison, and offer, their wisdom and guidance to the people inside.
Yeah, thank you very much. God bless all of you. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
The gentleman yields back. Oh, yes. And we recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing. And I want to thank the witnesses for courageously sharing your stories and for doing what you do, for being out there. A lot of good points made. I'm thinking of some of my experiences in my community. I'm from the northern suburbs of Chicago, and in one of my communities, Waukegan, there's a disproportionate number of oftentimes young people who are in the prison system, but there's been a compelling and compassionate effort to address that in an organization called the Coalition to Reduce Recidivism, and they've been at the forefront. And I've had the chance to attend many of their meetings. It would be a longtime supporter of the organization. And in those meetings, I've had the chance to meet some of the people who are returning citizens and hearing their stories. And I bring that up because it's hearing those stories that is so important to understanding not just the challenges our returning citizens face, but the justice part of justice system we need to provide to make sure that these people have the chance to succeed and be a part of our communities. And I think it was Mr. Hopwood, you said reentry requires a community. And it really is true, and that's one of the things that I hope through these conversations and hearings we can work to further that along. But also one of my takeaways, and again, Mr. Hopwood, you said it, is we need to start the process when people enter the prison system. It's important for us to see these young men and women of all ages as part of our community and a responsibility to help them make that transition. Is it Mr. Blessingame? Did I get that right? Your story and your experience, you talked about being an entrepreneur, but needing to channel in the right direction. One of the things, and my colleague Mr. Vesey touched on this, is the ability to it's hard to be something or aspire to be something when you don't have the chance to see that something, whether it's in a role model or whatever. And so the need for mentoring, whether it's through SCORE programs or the other programs in prisons, is a piece of the things that we have to do. But it's incumbent upon us as members of Congress to open our eyes and be willing to get out of our comfort zones. For me, the first time I had someone talk to me about ban the box. And coming from the financial services industry, I said, whoa, I need that box to know. He's like, well, no, you can ask it later. And at least give the chance to have the interview. Give us a chance to tell the story. And having been an entrepreneur and understanding the importance of that, I appreciate being your own boss, making your own destiny. But again, Mr. Hopwood, you talked about scrappiness. And I think that's a piece of being an entrepreneur. In my district in Chicago area, I had a chance to meet with a guy named Tom Decker. He's got a company called Chicago Green Insulation. And what they're doing is installing insulation, mostly in basements, but that is part of this move towards green technology, green energy. But what he's found is that it's a skill set that he can teach pretty quickly to people coming out of prison, and they can learn the skill. And he's hired a number of formerly incarcerated individuals. And what he's also found is that these people, as you mentioned, Mr. Wozniak, these people show up on time. They do their work. But the soft skills are something I have to do, and he's working on that. I guess my broad question for the whole panel, anyone can jump in, is, not just the entrepreneurs, the returning citizens who are becoming entrepreneurs, but the small businesses who want to reach out and hire returning citizens. What more can we do to help them? Are there programs we can put in place to help those companies that say, hey, give these people a chance, let them learn the skills, give them the space to make their mistakes and grow, and maybe grow some entrepreneurs along the way?
Well, I don't think it's about programs to start. I believe from our experiences, it's the relationships. Small businesses come to us to hire guys from our organization because we work on the hard skills and soft skills, the relationships, conflict resolution. That's something that somebody mentioned about, being in prison, there's a lot of conflict. That's the thing that I've had most problems with the guys in our transitional houses, how to resolve conflict. Because if you can't resolve conflict, you can't keep a job. So that's one of the things that we work on a daily basis in our program, and our one-year program is resolving conflict. And when we talk to small businesses about that, they want to be able to hire people who can resolve conflict because they'll stay on the job longer.
Absolutely. Mr. Wozniak?
I think the biggest thing the federal government can do is actually start issuing contracts to companies that hire returning citizens and start talking about the success that they're having. Federal government tends not to do that. I know we're doing it in the state of Michigan. They banned the box, and they actually hire people coming directly out of prison.
Great. And as you said, not just do it and support the companies that do it, but celebrate and
absolutely.
We have communication tools at our disposal. We can work to get the message out. My time is up, but again, I want to thank all of the panelists for being here, and in particular the chairwoman. Thank you for having this hearing.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Well, let me take this opportunity to thank all the witnesses for taking time out of their schedule to be here with us today. Definitely, your testimonies were compelling. Your stories are truly inspirational. I cannot recall a more moving hearing that we have conducted throughout my 27 years serving in this committee. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Through hard work and perseverance, you were able to overcome the barriers that reentry and lead successful lives. I commend each and every one of you for your commitment to criminal justice reform. And I would also like to thank Ms. Hodges for her willingness to testify today and to share her expertise. And of course, we recognize the presence of T. Rowe, the director of the Small Business Development Centers Network. In closing, we had a chance to learn more about the challenges facing formerly incarcerated individuals and how entrepreneurship can give them a second chance upon re-entering society. I look forward to working with you as well as my colleagues on the committee to advance legislation that will provide the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated with the entrepreneurship training services needed to launch and grow a small business. And before we close, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record testimony submitted by Representative Hakeem Jeffries from New York. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.